Hello, it's Friday the 4th of April 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
It's great to be with you, Mike.
And by video link, we have Mark Anderson. Now, later in the programme, we're going to be covering foreign influence, the next World Health Assembly and Iran. But we're going to begin with US tariffs, of course. Everybody will be aware of this by now. It's all over the media that yesterday Donald Trump announced tariffs and trade right around the world, and the effect on stock markets has been pretty devastating. But not only stocks, also oil and gold had seen price falls, although the gold price seems to be rallying somewhat today. Now, here is what Keir Starmer had to say yesterday.
Last night, the President of the United States acted for his country, and that is his mandate. Today, I will act in Britain's interests with mine. Now, clearly there will be an economic impact from the decisions that the US has taken, both here and globally. But I want to be crystal clear. We are prepared. So today marks a new stage in our preparations. We have a range of levers at our disposal, and we will continue our work with businesses across the country to discuss their assessment of the options. As I say, our intention remains to secure a deal, but nothing is off the table.
So there he is, making threats, a range of levers that he doesn't have. But you know,
if it goes as well as Brexit, Mike, we should have nothing to worry about.
Well, look, the Trade Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, made a statement in the House of Commons yesterday. He was trying to put a brave face on things, and he pointed out that Britain received the lowest reciprocal tariff rate of anybody globally, and he called for calm amongst simple answers and loud voices he was complaining about. But anyway, he announced that British businesses would be offered the opportunity to consult on whatever the response is going to be to this from the government. He was clear in his speech as well that should a trade deal be done in the meantime, any measures taken in response following this consultation period will be immediately dropped. And as you can see, the consultation runs until the 1st of May there. And so business leaders in the country apparently being given the opportunity to comment on what kind of retaliatory measures to take here. But look, let's just see a little bit of Trump's announcement.
This is our great Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick. Thanks, Howard. So if you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to bring, it's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing. Fortunately, we came armed with a little smaller chart. So it's 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less. So how can anybody be upset?
How can anybody be upset, Patrick? Now, my first comment on this: if we just put the board back on here, this is very Netanyahu right here. Netanyahu standing in the United Nations, if you remember, with his board showing the map and all this kind of. He likes to present with these boards. Trump has clearly decided to get on that bandwagon.
Yeah, he's it's like show and tell, from primary school. He's look, we've done the work. Look, I swear we've actually done the work here. ChatGPT generated this chart for us. And actually, this is what people are criticizing them for. They say that they got this straight off of ChatGPT. These sort of basically differentials in trade. And so there's no science really, or no sort of thought that's really gone into it, other than they've just come out with these arbitrary numbers based on existing trade deficits. And so it's discounting all of the relationships that you might have with all these individual countries. So, Mike, it's incredible. It's incredible.
Well, Mark, let's bring you onto the program now. I appreciate absolutely that you may have a different view of this announcement than us in the studio. So you tell us what you think about it.
Well, as we know, on April 2nd, Wednesday, Trump characterized it as a day of liberation, and he called it a declaration of economic independence. And it's based on some executive orders. This, what we're seeing on the screen, is one of those orders that provides the basis for this, regulating imports with a reciprocal tariff to rectify trade practices that contribute to large and persistent annual U.S. trade deficits. So he's after what he calls fair trade to try and reduce trade deficits. And the basic history of this is on January 20th, he signed an America First trade policy presidential memorandum to look into the causes of trade deficits. Then on February 13th, he signed another presidential memorandum entitled Reciprocal Trade and Tariffs. And then on April 1st, the day before this big announcement, he received the final results of those two initial investigations. And then what he did on April 2nd is the result, he said, of those investigations. He did make an interesting reference while calling for fair trade and talking about making America wealthy again, another one of his slogans. He explained in this Rose Garden speech that from 1789 to 1913, the U.S. was a tariff-based nation in terms of generating federal revenue. But in 1913, and he's correct in this, the federal income tax was created. Citizens were forced to find from their salaries and wages, from their traditional import water's edge. And Trump called the whole U.S. position being dependent on the income tax and not tariffs. He called it economic surrender. And he said that after about a century of that economic surrender, he wanted to end this bombardment against the U.S. in what he termed economic warfare. So it's an interesting point of view. He talked about the U.S. charging 2.4% tariffs on motorcycles, but Vietnam charging 75% for U.S. motorcycles. U.S. charging 2.5% tariffs on autos. Other nations charged the U.S. at least 10%. He noted that 94% of the cars used in Japan are made in Japan, kind of insinuating that countries should be more self-sufficient and make things for their own population, mainly for their own consumption, and only export the surpluses. But he did note this, and this is curious. During the speech, he said 3 big pharma companies are among the companies that are seeing this new economic landscape, and they want to expand their operations significantly in the U.S., and that's Johnson & Johnson, Eli Lilly, and Merck. So he said that with a fair degree of emphasis, guys, where big pharma is expected to expand its U.S.-based operations. Now, there's some other Trump tariffs that he mentioned. Maybe we'll put this one up, but 34% reciprocal tariffs on China, 20% European Union, 46% Vietnam, 32% reciprocal tariffs on Taiwan. And as you guys noted, whatever these countries charge the U.S. would charge them only roughly half of that. And Trump sees that as a fairness gesture and not being too onerous or heavy in terms of the tariffs that the U.S. would apply. And he did have this interesting comment. There will be complaints, he said, from the globalists, from the outsourcers. They were wrong about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I believe myself and you, Mike, have went on record that the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, was largely a bad deal. Trump tends to agree with that. And so he sees that globalist trade pact as having been a big negative, and that it's good that the U.S. never got involved in it. So I'm basically just laying out the facts of what he had to say at this point. There's a lot of implications, and there'll be a lot of tremors, of course. But it does have a lot of positive points in terms of reorienting the U.S. economy to get more revenue from the water's edge and less from the income tax over time. And as I pointed out last week, if the U.S. would not get ripped off selling currency to the Federal Reserve at such a huge loss, that could be another source of revenue to rectify our relationship with the Fed and maybe bring the Fed under more direct Treasury control. But I'll digress on that. But that's my view on it, and that's the basic facts so far.
Right. Well, I'd like to just get your thoughts on a couple of points there. First of all, the timeline that he gave at the beginning there, which ended in 1913, the world was a very different place then. There was no globalization, and tariffs played a somewhat different role at that time, I would argue. But the issue of whether or not this would ever raise money, which would result in income tax falling or disappearing altogether. I think the level of debt that the United States carries at the moment, that is not happening anytime soon. And the question is, could it even happen? Forget whether Trump's next 3 or 4 years, what happens following that? I mean, even if JD Vance were to become the president, it's not going to happen in his potential 2 terms either. So I'm not sure that is really a position that can be justified. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly Trump is putting the economic system of the U.S. on a different track. He's trying to reorient it. You're absolutely right that the amount of debt that the U.S. has would make it a very impractical to replace significantly the income tax revenue in the short term. I think the thinking appears to be to change the orientation, to put the economy and the revenue and things like that on a different footing, and perhaps with something in mind to make other changes down the road. Of course, ultimately, we'd love to see the Federal Reserve be sent packing and the U.S. create its own debt-free currency and basically nullify a lot of the existing debt, because a lot of it was arrived at through fraud and deceit anyway. So what would have to happen is there'd have to be significant monetary and other changes to go along with this reorientation of the revenue base. The question is do they have the staying power and the courage and the wherewithal and the good ideas to it's a little early to predict all where this will go, but it is a dramatic and interesting change nevertheless. And I don't have a lot of real strong opinions at this point, but I'll be studying it a little bit more. But the America self-sufficiency type philosophy, it does have some positive points.
I think the problem, Mike, is they're not articulating anything going forward. It's like they're kind of just doing it on the hoof, as it were. A couple of quick comments on some of the things that Trump has said there. 94% of Japanese are buying, selling cars are from Japan itself. Well, that might be because the Japanese make better cars. This is also part of it. And the Japanese prefer to have their own automobiles because they believe it's superior engineering. And the fact that Big Pharma is relocating in the U.S., this is not a good sign, because what's their biggest profit center right now? Big Pharma. It's vaccines. Right. So what does that tell you? What's Trump planning to unleash on the American public or the world? Is another wave of vaccines, another fake pandemic? This is not. This doesn't. It's not give us a lot of confidence at all.
Okay, well, I'm sure we're going to be talking much more about this in extra. But Patrick, what have you got on this?
Well, this is Caroline Leavitt is his mercurial White House press secretary, and she's hitting back because there's been a lot of negative pushback on the tariff announcements. And here's her from the White House lawn.
This is a national emergency. We have a $1.2 trillion trade deficit. We've had 90,000 factories closed across our heartland. We've had 5 million manufacturing jobs go overseas since 1997. And President Trump is finally doing something about it by implementing these reciprocal tariffs. It's the golden rule for the golden age of America. As for prices and what the American public can expect, they can expect price stability. They can expect to buy American. It's a patriotic thing to do.
So the problem is America doesn't produce enough goods to, quote, buy American. They're saying it's a national emergency. He couldn't have done this by executive order unless declaring a national emergency. And apparently it was the hook for this was fentanyl was coming through like the Mexican border. So you do a global trade overhaul as a result of that. Doesn't quite make sense. And she's saying this is a national emergency because we have a trade deficit since 1997. Well, that's the slowest emergency in the history of humanity. 30 years to figure out you've got an emergency. No, this is globalization, Mike. That's all it is. And unfortunately, Wall Street has redesigned itself, as has the City of London. Look at the Mayfair set and you learn the history of how you asset strip companies and offshore everything and benefit from the labor cost differential. That is globalization. It's been better for the bottom line for the S&P 500 companies. It's been good for the stock market, good for Trump and all his friends and his billionaire buddies. And now all of a sudden, we want to reverse everything overnight without thinking it through so much. So here's the world reaction from some of the other global leaders. We heard from Keir Starmer earlier what his statement was. Here's some other of world leaders' reaction to Trump's tariffs.
There is going to be an impact on the U.S. economy, which will build with time. In our judgment, it will be negative on the U.S. economy. That will have an impact on us. We are going to fight these tariffs with countermeasures. We are going to protect our workers, and we are going to build the strongest economy.
The tariffs will also hurt consumers around the world. It will be felt immediately. Millions of citizens will face higher grocery bills. Medication will cost more, as well as transportation. Inflation will go up. The costs of doing business with the United States will drastically increase. And what is more, there seems to be no order in the disorder.
President Trump referred to reciprocal tariffs. A reciprocal tariff would be 0, not 10%.
We believe the recent measures and other broad trade restrictions imposed by the U.S. government could have a significant impact on economic relations between Japan and the U.S., and ultimately on the global economy and the multilateral trading system as a whole.
Look, as far as litmus tests go, if you're agreeing with Ursula von der Leyen, you know that the world is topsy-turvy. Things are not going well for the Trump administration. It's the first time I've ever heard her speak sense in how many years she's been installed as the head of the EU. So this has united the world against the United States. This is what it's done. And it's caused and increased a decoupling from not only from the U.S., but just from the East and the West, along with all the other sanctions and the economic warfare that could ensue from this, Mike, especially with China and some of these other Asian tigers, could be devastating for the U.S., but also for the global economy in general. We're looking at a recession. If there is a recession, they're not going to be able to sell it and blame it on Biden. Even if it's true and we've inherited trends from the Biden administration, it's going to be laid at the feet of Donald Trump. And this is going to hurt him and hurt the Republicans in the midterms and also in the next general election. So there's harm that has been created here to other weaker countries. And that has not been addressed. We're told that Trump did not have any forward diplomacy at all. There was no consultation with any of these countries. They literally just, put this out on the hoof. So, I mean, it's on many levels, it's a disaster. And we'll see the stock market. Well, let's take a look at the stock market for a moment here. Stock markets have been hit globally. Let's look at just how bad the S&P 500 futures accelerated losses now down minus 3 to 4% in 4 minutes. So it took a massive tumble in just a short space of time after Trump signed the executive order tariffing basically everyone. 1.3 trillion of market cap erased in just under 4 minutes. That's a new world record.
Somebody's making lots of money out of that.
Oh, you better believe it. So yeah, that's the other thing is you'll see some of these hedge funds have done absolutely brilliantly, especially if they had advanced knowledge that this was coming down the pipeline. How do you get advanced knowledge? Well, let me see. Howard Lutnick, Cantor Fitzgerald, Scott Bassett, you've got the bankers in there. I don't suppose any of this leaked out, and I don't suppose Nancy Pelosi got an ear on it either here. So that's what's happened to the stock market. Now let's look at the negative effects here for a moment. Exactly what are they? Here's a few of them here. One of them is destabilizing a already delicate global trade markets, increases cost of business in the U.S. and globally as well. U.S. exports getting squeezed. Yep, that's going to happen as well because of the increase in cost. Domestic U.S. products prices will go up. Okay. And there's many reasons for that. Lower employment in affected industries within the United States. So this is going to cause, likely, according to many economists, layoffs. Okay. Retaliation by targeted countries. So cancels out any benefits of tariffs imposed.
Now, look, let's just briefly talk about this, because a lot of people will be saying, well, of course, this is a very good thing because this is going to bring jobs back into the United States. But this, perhaps if you look at this in a vacuum, that might be the case. But of course, we're not in a vacuum. And what we are in is the beginnings of the so-called fourth industrial revolution. We've got more and more automation, more and more AI. These jobs aren't going to come back to the United States because the United States is already costing so much in terms of labor costs. So they're going to have to get those costs down if they're going to compete, and they're going to use the automation to do that. So what's the outcome of this universal basic income?
Yeah, basically, the U.S. has the highest labor costs in the world. Right now, today, as of this year, the highest cost of living on the planet, the United States, on the median. So there's no labor advantage for manufacturing, or cost advantage for manufacturing anything in the United States. Everything is going to be either overpriced, or they're going to have to squeeze it so hard to get a profit margin. This is why things are manufactured outside of the United States. It's taken 30 or 40 years to get to this point where they've retooled the entire economy, not just the U.S. economy, but the whole global economy. The only way the U.S. can be competitive, Mike, is to have robots manufacture everything. And what's that going to do to employment? Is that going to raise employment? I think the technocrats will say, well, we're just retrain everybody. That's what they say at Davos. We're going to retrain everybody to do robot repair. How about that? Or get fashion accessories, do fashion lines for your robots. Okay. So that this isn't going to work. It's UBI. It's a technocracy. This is basically, if anything, if it's going the way Trump is saying it's going to go, this is going to fast track the fourth industrial revolution in America. And guess who's leading the charge on robots replacing humans?
Couldn't be Elon, could it?
Just couldn't be. Take a wild guess. Elon Musk, Klaus Schwab's most favorite protege, Elon Musk. So, I mean, if you want to get conspiratorial about what's really going on behind the scenes, well, we don't have to look very far, do we? Let's look at the inauguration here. This is when Trump got elected. We'll look at the inauguration. Here it is. This is the front row of Trump's inauguration, Mike. And there's Elon, 300 million. That was the cost of admission to get into the White House. Bought his way in. There's Jeff Bezos. There's Sundar Pichai, I think his name is. And then we have Mark Zuckerberg there. All these guys, front row seats. The big tech moguls, the monopolists, all get a front row seat. They want a return on their investment. And let's look at who else got a front row seat here. Well, of course, that's Mary Madelson, the Israeli lobby. In total, all campaigns, all contributions to all races, upwards of 600 million in the last election cycle. That includes everybody, including Donald Trump. Donald Trump's share of that, Mike, was about 235 million. So, hey, I suppose we can all afford to get a seat at the table. What do you think? Probably not. So this is just the way it is. I'm not, as an American, this to me is very foreign, to have this sort of overt buying your way into the White House. And this used to be done, but a little more sort of undercover on K Street and J Street. But now Trump's given them a front row seat. He's made no bones about it. He said, you can buy your way into the government. You can buy your whatever agenda you want, or whatever legislation you want, put the money on the table. And everyone will see it. And this is how it's going to be. This is basically creeping towards corporativism in a way that even Benito Mussolini would probably blush at how overt all of this is. So anyway.
But let's stick with Israel.
Well, yeah, let's stick with Israel. And this is pretty incredible here. A state visit in Hungary. That's Viktor Orban with, guess who? Benjamin Netanyahu. This is very strange, Mike. A 4-day state visit to Hungary. What on earth can you be doing in Hungary for 4 days?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Was Hungary not one? Oh, sorry. The headline even says it. So ICC. There's a bit of a conflict there.
Correct. Hungary is a signatory to the International Criminal Court. So what are they going to do? So basically, at the same time, Viktor Orban, the prime minister of Hungary, said Hungary is withdrawing from the ICC. This was a staged media event by Israel with the assistance of Hungary here to basically take a shot to undermine the ICC. So this is a big public relations move for Israel. You'd think he has other things to do, Netanyahu. I mean, Hungary's not a top-tier European country. They're doing very well in comparison to, I think, other European countries. But he's clearly, Israel's benefiting from this.
But Hungary has taken an anti-war position, and suddenly this is. Are we saying a reversal of that position here?
No, they have a bifurcated foreign policy, just like the United States. They're dovish on Ukraine and they're hawkish on Israel and Gaza and so forth. So I think this is a huge miscalculation, personally, by Viktor Orban, and he will eventually, I think it's going to hurt him down the road. Perhaps because Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal by most of the world's standards, except for just a few people. So this is very an interesting development here. And then just to move on, this is the situation right now in Gaza. Unbelievable what's happened over the last week. And I know everybody has seen this type of footage over and over, and you've probably had enough of it, and so have I. And I'm sorry to have to show this, but I think it's important that people be reminded this is what's happening today, yesterday, the day before, the week before, so forth. The killing has just gone record numbers of Palestinians massacred by the day, just in the last week. So Israel's actually stepped up the killing of civilians in Gaza. So this is just unbelievable. You know, I have something to say about this, but I can't say it as well as this gentleman. His name is Alon Mizrahi. He, by his own admission, a former Israeli, as he calls himself, but he is really an incredible voice for humanity. Really, let's listen to what he put on X just today.
They have seen all of it. They have seen everything that we have seen. Every member of every parliament, every journalist, every international judge and institution and agency, every PM, every president, every king, every chancellor. They have seen everything that we have seen. They have seen all of it. They have seen the dismembered children. They have seen them under the rubble, dead and sometimes alive. They have seen it with their own eyes. They have seen everything that we have seen. They have seen the children bleeding and dying on hospital floors. They have seen the parents holding their dead babies. They have seen families exterminated to the last member. They have seen the broken communities. They have seen the burned and bombed hospitals. They have seen UN shelters being destroyed. They have seen cemeteries being razed. They have seen all of it. They have seen people in tents being burned alive in their hundreds and thousands. They have seen everything that we have seen and brought us to the brink of not wanting to live anymore. Because we are normal and this is the normal reaction to what we see. And they have seen all of it with us. They are watching it with us. And they say nothing. They say nothing and they continue to stand with Israel. Every member of every parliament, from New Zealand to Australia to Canada to the US to Britain to Spain to Portugal to Belgium to Greece to Turkey to every Muslim and Arab country. They have seen everything that we have seen and they say nothing. They say nothing and they continue to support Israel. they continue to stand with the genocide.
Obviously, it's a longer statement than that, Mike, but I do encourage people to follow Alon Mizrahi on X and Twitter, and he puts out some great takes. Obviously, I've interviewed him over the summer. Like to get back in touch, but he really just kind of put it together. Look, the last thing I'll say on this, and it's a really important point. Trump rode into office on this ceasefire deal like he was the peace president, okay? And on March 18th, Israel resumed bombing of tents with refugees in places like Khan Yunis and in Gaza City now just this week. So there was no pushback from Trump or Witkoff or any of his team. So Israel broke this great ceasefire, and there was no complaints, no pushback, no attempt by the White House. You know what this means? That was never a ceasefire deal. Netanyahu came to Washington at the beginning of February. And what they agreed on, it looks to me, it's very likely what they agreed on was not a ceasefire, but a pause to rearm so that Israel and the United States could reorganize, rearm, and continue this genocide and policy of ethnic cleansing. That's what this is. And this is, to me, one of the biggest deceptions, one of the most willful deceptions in the history of any U.S. leadership ever. Okay, Donald Trump and his whole team, if Witkoff has knowledge of this, they should be indicted for war crimes, for being a party, for being a co-belligerent in this huge deception of a fake ceasefire ploy. There is no more leeway that we can give Trump anymore, because he took all the credit for being a ceasefire president. And look what he's done here. Not a word of pushback on the Israelis when they resumed this and started bombing South Lebanon as well. So this was a ruse, quite clearly. So anybody still apologizing for the Trump administration or calling them Steve Witkoff a great peace negotiator, utter balderdash. That's all I'm going to say on that.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll be talking more on that later, though. So, okay, let's move on. If you like what the UK Column does, you'd like to support us, support.ukcolumn.org is the place to go, or there's a link on the front page of the website. You can make a donation, or you could join as a member. If you do join as a member, you can get access to UK Column News Extra, which goes out immediately after the news programme. Every day we do a news. You can pick something up at the UK Column shop or from clive2carl.com using the link here, and we do get a small commission if you do that. But if you can't do all that, that's fine. At least do share material if you see it on anything that you're interested in on the UK Column website, because we are censored heavily. And if you can help us get around that censorship, that is a fantastic help to us. So thank you to everybody that does assist in some way. And a massive thank you to everyone who is coming to UK Column on location in Cheltenham tomorrow. Patrick will be speaking there, of course, along with everybody else you can see on screen. We're really looking forward to it. There's quite a lot of people staying in the evening to have a bit of a relaxing evening afterwards. But if you can't get there, it's still possible to get on the live stream. Please do have a look at that if you're interested. And everything, by the way, we'll just say to everybody that is coming, if you aren't aware, the doors open at 9 a.m. Please be there as close to 9 a.m. as you possibly can. We'll be starting about 9:45, and that applies obviously to the live stream as well. Now, just to let everybody know, if you have bought a live stream ticket, if you log into the UK Column community website and head up to the top there, you'll see my profile link. That's what the profile page looks like for my test account. And if you scroll down that page a little bit, you'll see the card for the purchased events and the live stream for tomorrow. You just click on that link and that will get you to the relevant page. There's a chat box in there. We will be monitoring the chat box tomorrow. So if you've got questions, leave them in there and we'll do our best to address as many as we possibly can. Okay, let's move on then. And well, the Home Office has announced the expansion of the so-called foreign influence registration scheme. They said to those being directed to conduct. Well, let's just put the graphic on screen first of all. Sorry about that. Here we are. So they said to those being directed to conduct hostile acts on UK soil by the Russian state, we're offering a clear choice: expose their actions or face jail. That's the Russian actions, the alleged Russian actions. We're better equipping law enforcement with intelligence to disrupt Russian operations. So that was the position. Now, on April Fool's Day, Dan Jarvis made a statement to the House of Commons. But before we look at what he said, here's a short video clip of, we put this out on X, I think yesterday.
If anyone has been asked by a foreign power to carry out political activity within the UK, or has been asked to do any activity for the Russian or Iranian state, they will need to register under the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme. This scheme will help us to understand the scale and nature of this activity. Registering won't mean they can't carry out that task, or that it's wrong, and we understand that people are more likely to register if they have nothing to hide. Doing so will help us better understand who is trying to act covertly. By shining a light on these actions, we are helping secure the UK from covert interference. It's about transparency, accountability, and keeping our country safe.
So don't worry, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, apparently. But the question is, what does he mean by if anyone has been asked? Well, we'll come back to that question in a minute. But in the House of Commons, Jarvis explained that the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme is a fundamental component of the National Security Act, which the House passed in 2023. He said the act was a response to the evolving threat of hostile activity from states targeting the UK. He went on to claim that 6 charges have been brought against individuals in the UK, with 5 other individuals linked to this, linked to those 6 charges being charged with other unrelated offences. But he talked about 2 tiers of activity being defined. So we've got political and we've got enhanced. So we've got the political influence tier of the scheme, which applies to all states, he said, which will allow the UK to be better informed about the nature, scale and extent of foreign influence in the UK's political system. And the enhanced tier of the scheme has been specifically designed to shed light on activities directed by those foreign powers or entities whose activities pose a threat to the safety and interests of the UK. So last month, he said, I set out our intention to specify Iran under this tier of the scheme. So the question is, who are the targets of this? And in fact, earlier I asked if anyone, his comment, if anyone has been asked by a foreign state, if you remember in his video clip. Well, so who's the targets of this? Well, people like Chris Williamson, perhaps, David Miller, both of whom present programs on Press TV, will undoubtedly be targets.
Richard Medhurst,
for example.
One.
But
basically people doing journalism.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the question is, were they asked by the Iranian state to present programs on Press TV? Because that's what the legislation is about, at least to a significant degree. And if you remember, David Miller was stopped in early March by anti-terrorism police when he came back to the UK from Beirut. Now, let's just remind ourselves why that was.
So I was detained under Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act when I came back from Beirut on Monday night, the 24th. And the reason for that was, of course, because I'd been at the funeral for Sayed Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut, and I had posted on X a number of posts about my experience of the funeral with shots of the actual ceremony itself. As a result, Zionist Twitter went absolutely crazy, started mass reporting me to the police, anonymous trolls, known personalities, Zionist lobby groups, all calling for me to be stopped and detained under Schedule 7, and then the Daily Mail just after midnight, and then the Telegraph later on that day. And the Telegraph had a quote from Robert Jenrick, the former housing minister, who called for me to be arrested, said I was supporting terrorism and wasn't even hiding my anti-Semitism. Now, of course, Robert Jenrick has form in this regard. Of course, he's a fanatical Zionist, and he tried to get me sacked from my job at the University of Bristol, in which he was partially successful. So that's why I was stopped and detained under Schedule 7, because the Zionists bounced the police into doing it.
And at the end of March, he was again targeted, and this time by the Board of Deputies of British Jews who wrote to the Home Office over what they describe as the incendiary rhetoric of disgraced former academic David Miller. We have serious concerns, they said, that he is directly inciting violence against Jewish individuals and institutions in this country. I mean, that's just such total nonsense. But if we're talking about, Patrick, if we're talking about foreign influence here, why is Israel not on the enhanced list? The enhanced tier of this piece of legislation?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the irony of that, the Board of Deputies and the Israeli lobby basically organizing, leaning on the government to target and investigate someone like David Miller. Okay, is that not foreign meddling and foreign influence? Because as far as I know, David Miller has a very long career track record of talking and uncovering and researching these subjects academically and peer-reviewed literature and so forth his whole career. So it's not like he just started doing this yesterday. This has been his whole life's work. But all of a sudden it had a high political cost for this foreign lobby that operates in the U.S., operates in Britain, and operates in Brussels. So, I mean, if we're going to talk about foreign influence, which country has the most influence in our governments in the West? Well, it's pretty clear, especially looking at what we showed you from the White House in Washington, unprecedented levels of influence from the state of Israel. So it's only fair that should be on the table for discussion.
Absolutely. So Iran added to the enhanced tier for that legislation. But what's going on with Iran at the moment? Are we going to war?
This is the big question, Mike, and this is a very worrying situation, and even more worrying by the fact that it's total silence from many governments on this. Everyone's just paralytic about it. Let's bring this up on screen. So what are we looking at? Is this war fever? Well, it certainly looks like it. We could very well be, Mike, weeks away or less from some kind of a preemptive strike against Iran. Hence, this is why governments are raising their rhetoric, their anti-Iranian rhetoric, because I think they're consolidating for what might be coming just now. So we'll go back here. So this is from the Israeli press, the Times of Israel, or as some people call it, the Genocide Observer, based in Tel Aviv. Trump threatening here. He's saying there will be bombing if Iran fails to make deals on nukes. This is an extraordinary situation. He's demanding that Iran come to the table to sign a nuclear deal, just like the nuclear deal Trump himself tore up in May of 2018 during his first term. There was a perfectly good deal with all these foreign countries as guarantors. It was called the JCPOA. And the P5+1 were guaranteeing it was absolute transparency, total supervision. And Trump, at the orders of Israel at the time, Netanyahu's office, through Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, tore up this agreement. Now he's threatening a preemptive nuclear strike. Because Trump's new, and this is the read between the lines, folks, Trump put a new nuclear doctrine forward that says that they have to use tactical, low-yield nuclear weapons to penetrate underground facilities in Iran. Okay, so that's a preemptive nuclear strike against a country that doesn't have nuclear weapons, or there's no evidence. How do we know this? Well, I'll just take the word of the Director of National Intelligence, who testified in front of the Senate last week that Iran is not building any bombs, does not have any nuclear weapons, although they are a nuclear threshold state, which means they could produce them if they wanted to. So basically, Trump's threatening Iran over something his own DNI says they don't have. I mean, this is an incredible series of events here. And so let's look at the reaction from the Iranian leadership here. This is a supreme leader. So this is actually very important. We actually broke this on X Spaces, I think, on Sunday night. And this is from Ali Larijani. This is the senior advisor of the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. He's saying, we are not moving forward towards nuclear weapons, but if you do something wrong in the Iranian nuclear issues, talking to the U.S., you will force Iran to move towards that because it has to defend itself. In other words, Trump has threatened Iran with annihilation if they don't come to the negotiation table. I don't know about you, Mike. It's not a very good negotiation tactics if you want the other side to come to the table. So this is, again, amateur hour and just on the hoof, no diplomacy acumen whatsoever by the Trump administration. So what's the issue here? We'll bring this up on here. This is the JCPOA. What are we looking at here? What do we need? What do we need? We're always talking about problems on this show, and everyone's always complaining about solutions. So let's give you a solution. I have a solution. Okay, here it is. JCPOA number 2. Okay, what does JCPOA number 2 look like? Well, Mike, it can look like many things, but I think if there's going to be another Iran nuclear deal, it can't just be Iran at the table, because they don't have nuclear weapons. But one country in the Middle East has nuclear weapons. The state of Israel has a nuclear arsenal between 200 and 300 warheads. So you can't have Iran without Israel in a new JCPOA agreement. It's time that Israel declares its nukes to the world and becomes transparent. Otherwise, this whole thing is not going to work. And, many people have commented on this over the years, Mike, about Israel's secret nuclear weapons arsenal. And it's effectively destabilized the Middle East because they're able to engage in nuclear blackmail and nuclear extortion. So everybody has to sign the non-proliferation treaty except for Israel. And this has been the case for so very long. And they've been allowed to have this secret arsenal ever since John F. Kennedy was president. And Kennedy actually made this a major issue, but unfortunately he was assassinated in 1963 after demanding that Israel allow inspectors in and be a signatory to the NPT. Okay, so this, after Kennedy was killed, this has been a moot issue as far as the U.S. is concerned politically. So this isn't really going to work. And so imagine that all this is happening while Israel is in the international courts of justice for genocide. Okay, and they have nuclear weapons. And meanwhile, their president or their prime minister and their defense minister, Yoav Gallant and Netanyahu, are both in the dock for war crimes in the ICC. So if you want to talk about rogue states, unstable governments, you don't have to look any further than the state of Israel. And again, this has been an issue it used to be an issue back in 1963 when this man was president. Okay, he was trying to compel Israel. And by the way, this isn't just me saying this. This is from the National Security Archive here. We've republished all of the files at 21stcenturywire.com from the U.S. National Security Archive, where Kennedy was pushing for inspections and getting massive pushback and a lot of bad energy from the Israeli lobby at the time in 1962 and 63. They wanted inspectors in Dimona. Israel said, no way. Then Kennedy was assassinated. I'm not saying those two events are absolutely connected, but I will say that they correlate. Let's just put it and leave it there for the moment. So in summation, Mike, it's really about this. If there's going to be a JCPOA, okay, you've got all the players there, the guarantors and Iran on that side. You're going to have Israel on this side. It's just going to have to be that way. Otherwise, this is not going to be a credible conversation. And this is really the problem. This is at the core of everything. Now, I put out a summary of this plan. I've got great feedback from this. People from Iran, journalists have said they like it. People from Russia have said they like it. Other European countries, I've got a really good positive feedback from this. This is up on my X account, a possible solution. So it goes like this, Mike. Either both of them have no nukes, Israel and Iran, or if Israel's allowed to keep its nukes as an NPT signatory, then Iran should be able to have nukes as well, like Pakistan and India. And look at the situation with Pakistan and India. What's the likelihood that either of them are going to attack each other with nuclear weapons? Almost all the experts agree, zero. So in a way, it sort of balances the two parties out. So it's either both are not going to have it or both should have it. But you can't have one country keeping a secret weapons arsenal and holding the whole region and the world hostage, which is effectively what Israel's been allowed to do by the United States, their number one superpower sponsor and underwriter. Okay. This has to end, and it's coming to a head now. So it's either this or World War III. Okay, so I think this is a good opportunity for transparency and to bring this issue to the surface. It's been buried for so long, and this is, I think, a golden opportunity for the world.
Thank you, Patrick. Mark, let's bring you back onto the program and give us an update then on the upcoming World Health Assembly.
Well, it's that time again, ladies and gentlemen. We're coming around to the spring, and the 78th World Health Assembly is taking place the 19th through the 27th of May, 2025, of course, in Geneva, Switzerland. And there is a lot of concern here that the pandemic treaty, or AKA agreement, might be passed. Now, the WHO Director General, our friend Tedros, he gave some comments back in February at the 13th meeting of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body. That's the body that's working out the treaty or agreement. And on the 17th of February, he had some comments. And he basically said, as you know, we're at a crucial point. He wants to move to finalize this pandemic agreement for the World Health Assembly. It's really a case of now or never. And he's, again, speaking on the 17th of February. He referred to the 14th of February and said that the government of the United States informed the WHO of its decision to withdraw from the intergovernmental process. So evidently, I stress the word evidently, the U.S. is not involved. Tedros went on to say this: because we know that the next pandemic is a matter of when, not if. There are reminders all around us: Ebola, Marburg, measles, Mpox, influenza, and of course, the nebulous threat of the next disease X. He likes to say those kind of things. And he went on to say, no country can protect itself by itself. Bilateral agreements will only get you so far. Prevention is the responsibility of all countries. Preparedness is the responsibility of all countries. And response is the responsibility of all countries. So he's kind of scolding the U.S. in a way for bowing out, at least ostensibly. Now, an organization on the 4th of February called Health Policy Watch did note some things that don't get a lot of press. And one is that the WHO is short nearly $1.9 billion from a planned $4.2 billion budget for 2026-2027, along with a $600 million deficit through the end of 2025. And that $1.9 billion gap means the WHO is short nearly 45% of the funding it needs to run on even a reduced budget of $4.2 billion. And the outgoing Biden administration, according to Health Policy Watch, never paid the U.S. 2024 dues to the WHO of $130 million before Biden left office, which I didn't happen to be aware of. It's interesting. The Health Policy Watch did go on to say, guys, the U.S. gave the WHO nearly $1 billion in fixed as well as voluntary contributions in 2022-2023. Altogether, the U.S. owes $260 million in WHO dues for 2024-25, but the WHO is unlikely to ever receive the money, they're saying, from Trump, despite an ostensibly legal obligation to pay it. Trump announced in January that he's pulling out of the WHO altogether. But it's important to note that under the original rules of the WHO going back to 1948, the withdrawal by the U.S. will only be effective 1 year later, in other words, January of 2026. So technically, the U.S. is still a member of the WHO. Now, I had a brief conversation with the longtime treaty activist James Roguski out of Los Angeles yesterday, and I'm reposting his all-important website here because it provides a portal for people to get involved, rejectthetreaty.com. And there's 2 documents that UK viewers are going to want to look at: 30 reasons to reject the pandemic agreement and 25 reasons to reject the amendments to the international health regulations. Very important stuff there at rejectthetreaty.com. Now, I got some things here that I jotted down that are miscellaneous but very important. The question is, even though the U.S. said it's backing out of the WHO, and as I mentioned, technically and officially, they're not all the way out, will they still send delegates to a planned April 7th through April 11th final treaty negotiating session? That's next week. That's this coming Monday through next Friday. So on my report next Friday, I'll have an update on this. But as this slide talks about, the treaty talks resume this coming Monday and run through Friday. That's a continuation of the 13th meeting of the INB, where Tedros' comments that I mentioned a few minutes ago were made. And there are a number of other important things to consider. So will the U.S. send a delegation to the April 7 through 11 talks, maybe to throw a wrench in the works? Trump is skeptical of the WHO. He says he's skeptical of what's going on. He's made some overtures about the treaty in a negative way. But however, Trump has been silent, according to Roguski and according to my own research, on the international health regulations, which kind of run on a parallel track. And that's actually where a lot of the teeth are, a lot of the injustices and underhanded policies are located. And the way the things work in Geneva, if you're silent, that's interpreted as consent. So the Trump administration backing out of the WHO, making a little bit of noise about the treaty, but silent about the international health regs. And therefore, there's been no letter under Article 61 of the IHR, the regulations, where the U.S. would formally bow out of those regulations. There ought to be a letter under Article 61, and that has not happened. So it appears the Trump administration, according to the basic interpretation and rules of the WHO, is not against the international health regulations. And it's also important to note, however, that early in Trump's presidency, practically right after he got inaugurated, there was an executive order that directed the Department of State to sever ties or at least study a broad range of ties with foreign entities. And James Roguski and myself were talking about it, and we're wondering if that would include anything to do with the international health regulations as well as the WHO and anything the WHO does. So that executive order possibly might cut some relationships with the WHO in ways that we're not aware of yet. And it's interesting to note, too, that under the rules of the international health regulations, let me make sure I got this straight here. Yeah, under the rules of that, starting in September, the signatory countries were given 10 months to chime in. So that goes until about July 19th coming up. All the countries involved were giving 10 months to rebut or talk about the content of the international health regulations. So there's open speculation as to whether the U.S. and other countries will raise their voice in time to meet that deadline, which would be about a July 19th deadline to be safe. And it's just hard to say at this point whether under Article 61, whether the U.S. or any other countries will take advantage of that time gap and protest or in any way rebut the international health regulations. So those regulations were officially adopted June 1st of 2024, but there was this provision to allow a 10-month window for comment, but it got delayed because they had to reproduce the international health regulations in at least 6 languages and get rid of any problems in translation. So that's the latest. One other thing is that while all this is happening, the 24th through the 30th of April has been declared by the WHO to be World Immunization Week. And they're saying that vaccines are one of the greatest achievements of humanity. Since 1974, they've saved 154 million lives, And of course, that's highly questionable. If someone lives a healthy, long life, how do you know for sure that the vaccine is the reason that they did? Maybe they got better sanitation. Maybe they had better nutrition, all sorts of things that can raise human immunity without vaccines. How are those numbers arrived at? It's difficult to say. But the treaty, of course, could carry a lot of negative connotations and possibly reinstate lockdowns and things like that. So now is the time for a lot of people to go to rejectthetreaty.com and do their own research and get involved and raise some cane about this and try and make their voices heard. So back to you guys.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Now, on Wednesday's program, Sandy Adams was covering an organization called BidStats. Let's bring them on screen. And the pre-procurement notice by APHA for provision of agricultural valuation services to the government. Now, there was some criticism of that report with some suggestions that it was fear-mongering. Now, the question was the criticism justified? And the answer, in my view, is absolutely not. Now, in many ways, Sandy's report on Wednesday is indicative of the challenge we face in producing a news program like this. And for example, with the best will in the world, individual reports don't always stand on their own, in the sense that they actually need to be seen in the context of previous coverage. And this is always a challenge for us to try to get the full context across within the time limits that we have. Now, sometimes we have to assume some awareness, therefore, of what's happened in prior days or weeks. But one of the best analyses of Sandy's report on Wednesday came from Claire Wills-Harrison from Lawyers for Light. And I want to draw your attention to a couple of points from it, but I'm going to put the URL for this in the show notes, because I absolutely suggest that everybody reads it all. So let's just have a look at what she said here. She began by saying that she sees the significant criticism of the UK column for this the segment on this as being scaremongering due to the alleged framing of the APHA pre-procurement notice as, quotes, a new thing. And she said that she didn't agree because renewal was mentioned. So what I want to do here just is to remind ourselves of what Sandy said about this.
Very interesting. They've put up an advert that they're recruiting for valuers now, and it's they've renewed their contract, and this is the renewal of that contract, 2025 renewal of that contract. So
I don't know how many more times Sandy could have said that this was a renewal. So anybody suggesting that it was anything other didn't actually pay attention to what she was saying. But not only was renewal mentioned, it was, as I say, mentioned 3 times. Anyway, Claire went on to say this, let's bring it on screen, that she believes, more importantly, that some things are missing from the deeper point that the segment was trying to make about broader things of government overreach based on suspicion only. And we're seeing regulations across the board in many sectors, not just agriculture. This is a vital point. She went on to say, I'm saying this is a vital point. It's one that's come to no surprise to anybody who's been paying attention to what we've been saying for over a decade, beginning with our documentary, Slaughtered on Suspicion. And I'll just mention here, by the way, in passing, that while Malcolm Massey's voice is heard on that, and Malcolm did the edit, Patrick was a huge part of that production. Maybe you'll have some comment on this in a second. But, what was this about? This was about the slaughtering of cattle during the foot and mouth debacle, based on modelling by Neil Ferguson from Imperial College. And that's the same Neil Ferguson who modelled the so-called spread of SARS-CoV-2, which resulted in effectively the same on suspicion policy being run on humans 5 years ago. This is the same policy that Charles has been highlighting for the last weeks and months with so-called bird flu. So the point here is there's a thread running through our coverage over many, many years, which needs to be taken into account, and not just one report. So coming back to Claire then, she said this isn't about new policy. It's about seeing the same patterns where suspicion is wielded as a weapon and the law a shield for the control grid to dominate, in this case agriculture, and then eventually ruin it, severely threatening food security. I'm not sticking up for the UK column here. They're quite capable of doing that for themselves. I was quite shocked that people are not seeing the overall themes and patterns, and that I think the segment was alluding to. And she ended by saying, that actually scares me. It means that people are not seeing the bigger picture. I don't know, Patrick, we're a little over time here, but if you've got a comment on that, because I think she hit the nail absolutely on the head.
Yeah, I mean, we've been in this game for many years, Mike, and I take a lot of criticism with a pinch of salt. Not to say that all criticism is not valid or valid. It's not. That's not the point. The point is that that we make an effort to go as deep as possible, and I think most of the audience who follow this channel and other channels like it will understand the bigger picture. But there's always some people that maybe aren't getting it, maybe because they've recently, quote, red-pilled on the issue, or they're kind of maybe new to the coverage, and they don't know the sort of body of work work that's behind it. So that's totally understandable. But all I can say is that we do appreciate the feedback, absolutely. And even hard feedback, hard criticisms are most welcome, and we do our best to address those in subsequent news programs. And I think that just strengthens our analysis and coverage, and it's great to get that feedback. So just the fact that it's coming through, good and bad, is most welcome.
So I do urge everybody to read Claire's summary of that, because it is an important point, though. And so we will leave it at that. I'm going to say thank you very much to Mark and to Patrick for joining me today, and to everybody that's watching today. I hope you enjoyed the programme. We hope to see as many as possible, everybody that's bought a ticket at least, at the event tomorrow, and as many as possible on the live stream. We will have fun over the weekend, and we'll see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. See you then. Bye-bye.